My talk is about China's war on the West. And one thing, Frank set up who Xi Jinping is. And I want to introduce you to the idea that of the psychopath. And I think it's an important concept because we sometimes we confuse ideology with actually the practice of who these people are who run totalitarian states. And I'll tell you a story, and my thing is I've done a lot of reading and thinking, and I interacted with American communists years ago, and I want to meet people from there, people who've been inside China and the former Soviet Union and Russia, and see how, just sort of see how everything fits together. And so some of my conclusions are unique because I'm listening for things that other people are missing. But what the GRU defector, Colonel Stanislav Lunev, told me more than 20 years ago is I asked a stupid question when I first met him. I said, are there any good people in the Kremlin or the Russian general staff? And he looked at me like I was stupid. I mean, I just felt like withering away right there. And he said, these are not human beings. These are crazy persons. And then he gave me a lecture on what a psychopath is, and that Lenin, the original Bolshevik, was a psychopath, and that they had a library in Moscow, and a former KGB officer had access to this library, told me the same story. They have several thousand documents there in which Lenin is using foul language saying, kill all the women and children, do a provocation on this village, wipe out everyone. And it's this archive they are holding in secret. They are not going to let anyone see this because it would prove that Lenin was a maniac. He was not humane. He was a monster. And so what Frank said about Xi Jinping is exactly right. Xi Jinping has made for his own private collection of art 3 statues. One of the statues is of Stalin, Lenin's hand-picked successor, who was himself the second greatest mass murderer in history. Another statue that he had made was of Mao Zedong, the #1 mass murderer in human history. And the third statue, this is a surprise, that Xi Jinping has made for himself, is of Adolf Hitler. These are Xi Jinping's heroes. So this tells you that Xi Jinping is in the psychopath club. He's a premier member. And so when you go to people like Xi and Putin, they really are not normal human beings. And that's why they're together. That's why they work together. Now, I just want to briefly go over a description of the Chinese long-range strategy and their policy concept, which introduces all kinds of complexities to us. They, at the top of their list, is to, at the right moment, combine with Russia, which they have done in the last so many years. But this combination goes back, according to the testimony of Lunev and others, to at least the end of the Cold War. Lunev suspected they were secretly aligned when they were pretending to be enemies, but he could not prove that. But they were, because Lunev, some of the secret information that he brought with him when he defected was about China and Russia planning a future war against the United States to destroy and occupy North America. That war would involve Russia taking over Alaska and parts of Canada and China owning the lower 48 states. Not just defeating us, or the idea of weakening us, which all of the things they do are done to weaken us. They're not weakening us just because it's like a hobby. They're weakening us because they want to control North America. And he said other countries would be invited into our country for looting rights. And everything he told me back in 1998-99 about this has been unfolding. And I have found additional evidence to support the claims that he made then. So combining forces with Russia is at the top of the list. Then there is, of course, the long-range deceptive engagement with the West, which began with Kissinger going to China, Nixon going to China, and of course, Carter signing agreements, and Reagan, and we've built up China. We have engaged with China. Everything Frank says about China, elite capture, imagine every businessman who goes to China, who builds a factory, is compromising himself with the Chinese. And that's not only if he physically goes, they can blackmail him, they can put cameras in his hotel room, they can entrap him, they can do all kinds of things to him. They can be his friends. You know, Mao Zedong, in the 1920s and 30s, he used to meet with Marxists from all over the world. And there was a young Peruvian Marxist who wrote a memoir about his meeting with Mao, was the center of it. And he called it The Yinan Way, was the name of the book. What he said in there, what Mao told him is, Mao said, you're too idealistic about the revolution. We need capitalists. He said, why sew up their pockets? This is what you do. You help them make money. And we're doing this in Yan'an with the landlords and the opium growers and the drug dealers. You help them make money and they give you political power. And of course, after you make them rich and you get political power, you're going to shoot them all. You're going to put them all against the wall and kill them, but then you're going to own everything. It's like Mao Zedong said, political power flows out of the barrel of a gun. Bankers, capitalists, people like this think political power is money. But Mao says, you have all the money, we'll make you rich, we'll have all the guns. Then stick them up. Now we have all the money and all the guns. That's how Mao's mind worked. And the Russians really got to appreciate Mao. This is why China has been, in many ways, more successful than Russia and the Soviet Union. So deceptive engagement with the West is the key. And we all know about the psychopaths in big business and the psychopaths in American politics. But I would suggest to you there's an apex predator psychopath. And the communists and these totalitarians, they're apex predators. They eat other psychopaths for lunch. And that's one thing we have to remember. There is a hierarchy here. Another part, of course, of this long-range strategy of the Chinese is, of course, to infiltrate Canada, Mexico, and the USA. Now, they're doing that to a lot of other countries, but here, with the attack on America, they're infiltrating Canada, and we know this in 1997, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Canadian Intelligence Service produced a joint study which is still classified in Canada. I managed to get a copy of it from a Canadian journalist. It is called the Sidewinder Report. And it was an early warning report, but it was too late. It was saying that Canada is being infiltrated and subverted by the Chinese communists. And how they were doing it is there's two main things they were doing. They were using triads. They were using organized crime and money laundering through urban real estate. And a lot of the report goes into details of case studies of them doing this. And this is in order to get control of Canadian politicians and businessmen to use Canada as a highway into America's flank. Now down in Mexico, you will meet certain people. Some of them are journalists, citizen journalists, and others are just Mexican citizens who know what's going on. And they will tell you stories. Years ago, when I worked for Newsmax, and Missy Kelly was the editor there, we were getting reports from a ranch down in Mexico where the Chinese had taken, this is 25 years ago, the Chinese had taken over the ranch. They were killing members of this Mexican family, and they were using it as a kind of base 25 years ago. Now, we were getting these reports from citizens to go look into, and when I spoke in Texas in 1998, down by the border, I heard these stories from the locals down in Texas, similar stories, things coming up from the border. And of course, the Chinese are involved in these drug cartels. And this is a very important element, the use of organized crime and drug trafficking. Now, there was a Las Vegas reporter named Scott Gulbranson. He wrote a book more than 20 years ago called The Silent Invasion. You can't find it. It's hard to find. I think Amazon rarely gets a copy, but it cost you over $100. I knew Scott. I got to know him. I spoke with him. I interviewed him. And he got cancer. I think he didn't make it because they couldn't reach him after a certain point. But Scott had gone down to Tijuana. He'd gone down to meet communists down there. And he found out from a Tijuana policeman who was murdered that the Cubans and the Chinese and the Russians were operating down there. But the Chinese especially were using the port of Ensenada to smuggle weapons. And he interviewed fishermen down in Ensenada. He said, they're offloading weapons. This is more than 20 years ago. And where are those weapons going? They're making arms caches in Mexico, but they're smuggling some of these weapons to make arms caches here in the U.S., to create some kind of advanced depots. And I will get to how that fits in a little bit. There is also something called the secret speech of Chi Hao-chen. Chi Hao-chen was the defense minister of China. Now, this goes to this other element. It's called the biological attack on America as part of their long-range strategy. General Chi Hao-chen gave this speech about 21 years ago towards the end of his term as defense minister of China. And the speech was about a poll that the Chinese had taken, Chinese Communist Party, about how Chinese citizens would react to the killing of POWs and the killing of women and children in a future war. And he said, I am happy to explain to you that 80% of the Chinese people are good with this. There's just 20% that aren't, and we're good with that. And then what he started to explain is, well, why did we do this survey? Because we have to clean up America. We have to kill the Americans. We have to exterminate them. Because China's economy is going to contract one day, and the Chinese people will turn on the Communist Party of China and hang us in the streets. And unless we direct the Chinese people out and teach them how to go out and colonize new land, and because China's grossly overpopulated, and this overpopulation has destroyed their rivers, destroyed their water tables, destroyed their environment. They can't feed themselves because they have over 1 billion people. They have 4 times the population we do in the same amount of space. And by the way, China's a very dry country. They don't have as much arable land as we do. So they have a really serious problem. And he said, so we have to teach the Chinese people to go out. Well, how can we do this? We can't go to attack India and take their land, or Japan, or Siberia, which is very inhospitable. Because anybody we attack, the Americans will help defend them. So why not just go after America and clean up America? And they've got the best land anyway. Well, how do we do this? Well, a nuclear war could happen, but then we'd lose, 700 million people. And he said, well, that might be okay because, we're overpopulated by that amount anyway. But he said we'd prefer to do it with biological weapons. And he said to clean up America, kill 100 to 200 million Americans with a biological attack. And of course, a funny thing, towards the end of his speech, he said, we are going to make them all believe we're coming for Taiwan, but we're coming for America. Why go after Taiwan and get ourselves cut off and blockaded and embargoed? America has to go down first. And this is sort of the key to the way they think. And in fact, there was a Chinese think tank that did a study on World War II. And they said, oh, Germany did it wrong, attacking Poland, attacking Norway and Denmark and the Low Countries and France and Yugoslavia and then the Soviet Union. They should have just attacked the United States, then all those other countries would have fallen. Because it was the United States that allowed all those countries to resist Nazi Germany. They did it wrong. And this study is sort of, again, another window into the way they look at this. And Luda Media, Mr. Wang of Luda Media has told me that his information about what the Chinese generals and leaders are thinking is that they want the next war to be fought on American soil, which is stunning. So the biological war, and the biological attack, they use viruses. This is what Dr. Li Ming Yan has pointed out. It's about viruses. And I thought, viruses, they're not very effective. How are you going to do that? That's a mystery. You know, we just went through the pandemic. It was a big nothing burger, right? I mean, they created all this panic over it. So there's a mystery as to what that was, except when we find out that the Chinese were involved in making vaccine precursors. Could they, if every American is told to get a vaccine, could they get some kind of poison in a vaccine precursor that kills within a couple of years everybody who takes? I don't know. It's another one of my stupid questions, which I think there are no stupid questions. We should be asking this because I want to know. And of course, China has been building up its military. They have the biggest military in the world. Why? People say they don't have a big enough merchant marine. That's nonsense. The merchant marine of Hong Kong and the Chinese combined is really what they control, and that's bigger than ours. They have a sea lift capacity really that's bigger than ours. Now, of course, how does this all work? As I said, the main final objective is to occupy the United States. That means they have to launch an invasion. Well, it's not going to be like Normandy. It's not going to be they're going to declare war fair and square and they're just going to come and then the U.S. Navy can stop them. Because the U.S. Navy would stop them. And this is what Colonel Lunev explained to me. I said, how do you invade the United States? How does China, and how do they do this? And he said, it was the German 1940 invasion of Norway is their model. Only they're going to do it better. They're going to do it in a super version. See, to take you back to the invasion of Norway, in that time, you look at a map. How does Germany invade Norway when you have the Royal Navy, the British Navy, can intervene and stop the invasion? And yet, Germany successfully invaded Norway, not just the part where their Air Force could cover going up Oslo Fjord right into the capital, but they invaded the whole length of the coast, all the way up to Narvik in the north. They invaded Trondheim, they invaded Bergen, all the way up. How did they do it? Past the British Navy. The British Navy, because it was an infiltration invasion. They did it with merchant ships, and the Germans, they didn't want the British to see a big fleet. They would have a ship, a merchant ship, loaded with troops and stuff, but it looks like it's just carrying consumer goods. They might even put a different country's flag on it, so it wasn't a German-flagged merchant ship. And they would have it leave, and they would sit there with a stopwatch before they let the next ship go. They would make sure that there was distance between them so no one would see a fleet. They'd just see individual ships with all this sea in between them. And they would come to the ports. Then there was the Brandenburg Regiment. This is the special forces of the Abwehr, of German military intelligence. They would become tourists. They would go to Sweden. They would cross into Norway. And there, before the war, they had stockpiled uniforms and weapons. They would go to the German businesses in Norway, put on the uniforms, get it, and they would go and they would attack power infrastructure. They would take airfields to allow German paratroopers to land and mountain troops. They would grab port facilities. They would facilitate, they would open Norway up to the invasion. Then, the most decisive element of all, perhaps, was Quisling. You've probably heard the term Quisling. Quisling was the defense minister of Norway, and he was a Nazi. He was a German agent, and he helped open up Norway to invasion. Now, I would submit to you that the information that I've reviewed from defectors and from, you look at Scott Gulbranson's book, you look at the Sidewinder report, they have been preparing an infiltration invasion along the Norway lines for more than 2 decades. I would argue for 3 decades. They have been preparing this. They have been organizing it meticulously and careful. carefully. We have our own quislings, as Frank pointed out. This is really dangerous. So they're engaged in weakening us. And now some criticisms of this. People say, Nyquist, you're just a fear-monger. This is all nonsense. The Chinese can't do any of this. Well, I hope so. It's not for want of trying on their part, and it's not for want of the kind of feckless disregard of the danger here in the U.S. There is the criticism that this plan has too many moving parts, that the Chinese and their allies could never bring it off. And that's a good point. But if any part of this plan succeeds, it's a disaster for us. This could disrupt our whole society, change our way of life, and even the failure, the refusal of Americans to see it could cause real domestic conflict among us. Oh, no, we're not going to do that. We can't defend ourselves. And then you're going to have people really upset with each other just on how to deal with it. There's the criticism of this attack plan that the China's biological attack may have already failed, that Americans aren't going to, if there's a further pandemic, they're not going to go along with what the authorities are going to say. We've already had a snoot full of Fauci and the bungling of the National Institutes of Health and the agency he controlled and the CDC. I mean, it's a disgrace. And that may be so. We'll see how compliant and how scared Americans are. China's economy and military system are corrupt, and they're backward. Well, the thing is that even corrupt and backward things can be corrected because there's purges going on in China, according to various sources, and sanguinary discipline, they will kill their own. And there's an attempt to bring the part of the Communist Party that thinks it's still glorious to be rich, to bring them to heel. There is the feeling, since the Communist Party of China is split over this issue of whether it's glorious to be rich or we need to go to war with America, that war itself basically politically forces the whole party to unify, because who's going to say we're not going to defend China, right, among the Chinese communists? And the war mobilization, in fact, can cover a lot of sins and mistakes. And there is a school of thought that Xi Jinping has to go to war to hold on to power because he has failed economically. Their economy is contracting rather widely. So anyway, I'm now at the end. I've got 2 minutes. I think that historians in the future are going to regard the period of the last 107 years since Lenin's Bolshevik Revolution. They're going to see it as one thing. It's very spread out, and it looks like a series of discrete events and wars. But just like Thucydides wrote about the Peloponnesian War, which seemed like a discrete, different group of wars, there is this common antagonism throughout. And I think that if you look at the totalitarian powers, they represent a new religion. There is this unity that all of their ideology, it's nihilism, it's materialism, it's an inversion of values. And it is become a disease in our elite universities, in our media. I mean, look at our entertainment. So I think we are, like Frank said, we're dealing with a spiritual crisis. And it's more like a religious war, so which further complicates it. So with that, I want to thank you, and I'll leave it over to Karen.